Hello, and welcome to our webinar series. Today's topic, adapting your patient financial communications. Well, my name is Steve Beard of State Collection Service, and I'm thrilled that you were able to join us today. Before we get started, just a few items. First, your phones have been muted, but that doesn't mean I don't want to hear from you. We do. So we'll allow some time at the end for questions. You can enter those, if you'll see on your panel there, you can enter those in the Q&A section. Go ahead and ask the questions throughout because, if relevant, I'll ask the question of Tracy at the time. Next, for those of you that are not familiar with State Collection Service, we've served the healthcare industry for about 72 years. We work with about 400 hospitals, 400 clients across the United States. And today's topic, we'll draw on a lot of our experience that we gained through the pandemic, specifically around the extended business office. So our experience as well as those of our clients. Well, with me today is Tracy Dudek. Tracy serves as State's Chief Operating Officer. She oversees our daily operation of the extended business office, collections, human resources, client services, and all of the departments within our 4 locations. Tracy has been with State since 2001 and has been instrumental in the company's dynamic growth during that period of time. Also important, she was very instrumental in a lot of the technology that we'll reference today and its use. So I'm very happy that Tracy is with us. In March of 2020, which really wasn't that long ago, but it just, for some reason, seems like forever ago, healthcare providers pivoted in a major way, implementing technology that, while it wasn't anything they hadn't already talked about, but it was, okay, this is on the roadmap, but it'll take a while to get there. But because of the pandemic, much of that was forced to occur over in hours or weeks, whether that be transitioning to telehealth or moving employees to a remote environment. Interestingly, when you think back to the beginning of the pandemic, most of us thought, well, this is just going to be a short-term thing. Well, obviously we were wrong. It's not been a short-term thing. Most of us thought, oh, well, we'll be back in the offices, etc. Well, most of us are still working remote. The other thing that we realized was the reason that for some of these changes not reverting back to the way they were is because productivity increased and morale increased. So with that said, I think it's important to take some time back and reflect on some of the lessons learned during the pandemic, specifically around, and what we're going to focus on today is patient communication. So what were the lessons learned about patient communication? What do the patients look for? And what are some of the trends yet that we're seeing? So when we think about that, we put it into 3 different particular groupings. First, patients needed and wanted to communicate with providers. The second is they sought communication that was easy for them. It was what they preferred at that particular moment. And then finally, patients want unique solutions for their unique challenges. So no cookie cutter solutions. So we're going to start with patients need and want to communicate with providers. Here's some of the things that we saw during the early stages of the pandemic. The first was because the patients were at home, that didn't mean they didn't want to communicate. In fact, our call volume increased rather dramatically. And for many clients, we work the MyChart chat functions. So emails also increased. But at the same time, the call volume increased, so did the length of call. There were just more questions answered. So if you look at July of 2019 to July of 2020, you'll see there was a pretty significant spike. This is based in number of seconds. There was a pretty significant spike in the average call handle time. And that really just means the talk time plus the updating time. So Tracy, what were some of the reasons why people were calling?
Well, consumers were definitely calling us because they had financial difficulty. Family members were ill, or even they were ill themselves. And especially those that were in pre-arranged payment plans, they needed to alter those plans. They needed to potentially skip a month on the payment plan or defer a portion of that plan to the end of the arrangement. And so they wanted to give their providers an update on what was happening in their life situation. And I take that as a real positive that patients wanted to communicate, and they still do because they care, deeply about the financial obligations to the providers and about the service they received. After all, it's very personal, right? Your healthcare. And so, you want to be able to go back to the provider again and have that feeling that you don't have an outstanding or an obligation that hasn't been tended to. So folks called in because they wanted to have those conversations, keep the provider updated, and see what they could do to work with the provider. So oftentimes we were restructuring payment arrangements, changing the length and the dollar amount of the arrangements, and just helping patients, navigate a portal, how to set up a payment plan on a portal, or just even making sure that we could cancel an arrangement and reset it for a different dollar amount. So it really was a lot about payment on the account, and of course making sure that insurance paid, right? Did your insurance pay everything they should have paid according to the patient before they made that arrangement? Because as it becomes more difficult to pay the bill, they want to make sure that all the other resources have been covered before they are making that payment out of their own pocket. So there definitely were reasons to communicate, and of course just ultimately that fear of, what if I became ill or a family member became ill? Would we be able to be seen by the provider if we had this unattended to financial obligation? So, there was fear in people. And so, I feel good about the fact that we were there and our provider clients are there to talk to patients when they needed it.
Oh, thanks, Tracy. So really boiling it down is people wanted to just a more thorough understanding of their situation as well as the charges themselves. And you mentioned about deferring payments, but if we take a step back and say, well, what if we took a more holistic approach on payments? Not just look at those that were deferred or whether it restructured because the balance was less. What about payments in general? So we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail, but we actually have engaged some data scientists and utilized a machine learning program. But there were some interesting observations about the liquidation of payment plans themselves. It goes without saying that if somebody is on a structured plan that they actually uh, that they agree with, that they can live with, the recovery rates are going to be much, much higher. So than those that just pay sporadically. Same thing as if it's a single payment plan or multiple payment plans, both are higher than if they were not on a payment plan. But what we're seeing is, and this started before 2000, before the pandemic, more and more patients want more and more payment plans. Why? Well, we all know the reason, because the high deductible plans are increasing at dramatic levels. So, Tracy, what else would you add about the payment plans themselves?
Well, the liquidation rates on accounts that are on a formal payment plan, at least in the large portfolio sample we did, was 79%, compared to a 20% liquidation rate for accounts that were not on a payment plan. So maybe you can say this states the obvious, Steve. I'm not sure, but it's like, well, we got to get people in a payment plan, because if they get in a plan and get in the habit of paying, the liquidation rate is 4 times higher when they're in a plan than not in a plan. But across an entire portfolio, and this is many different types of providers in an early out setting, is the sample that we used, only about 9% of the accounts actually are in a plan. So there's many people that never established that plan. So we look at it as our goal is not only to get the people that are in plans to keep their plan, keep their arrangement and complete it. But it's also our responsibility to try to get more people into the plan, right? Let's get people in a payment plan so they're in the habit of paying. And so we get the 79% liquidation rate instead of the 20% liquidation rate. And so many of the strategies that we're going to talk about through the remainder of this time together is about getting people into payment plans and things you can do, because once they're in the plan, they liquidate at a higher rate. And the math says it over a 2-year study over a very large volume of inventory. So Steve, if we go to the next slide, we've got some, I know this information takes a little bit to look at, and there's a lot of numbers on the page here, but we want to peel back the layers of the onion just a little bit and say, okay, but of all of the accounts that get on a payment plan, which we know is still a very small percent overall, what about people that stick to their plan the first time through and they never break an arrangement? How high is that liquidation rate? And we're going to call that a single payment plan. And that single payment plan liquidation rate being at 92.91%. That is very high. You can say those are the elite payers, the strong paying accounts, those that maybe reached out and initiated wanting to be in an arrangement first before they got the call. And then there's the multi-plan accounts, accounts that have to be in more than one payment plan through the life cycle of the account before it goes to bad debt collection. And I want to say it's okay. Things happen. People have life circumstances that occur that cause an arrangement to be broken and then need to set up a new arrangement or bring new accounts into an arrangement or take their inventory and just say, all right, I can pay more on these accounts, or I have to make a change to the plan. So the multis are all the accounts that had to make a change, had to make a second plan, broke, and were reset. And you can see that liquidation rate is at 64.44%. So I probably spend a little more time on that, Steve, than we want to, but understanding the difference between somebody who pays the entire time through without ever altering the plan or breaking, compared to the person that has to have some massaging or work with you on an arrangement is important. 64% is still a high number as far as a liquidation rate on a payment plan, but not nearly as high as it could be. And we're looking at numbers in 2020 during the pandemic. So this is a full picture of 2020. You can see the difference between 2019 and 2020 on the upper chart, showing a 91.36% liquidation rate in 2019 on single plans compared to 92.91 on single plans in 2020. And now we're not done with 2021, but it's showing at 98.43. Of course, we were not going to end the year at 98.43, I don't think, because we still have many months in 2021 for those plans to break. But the difference in change between those years shows that the people with the multi-plans are the ones that really needed that communication, and we were there for them. The 10% drop off in liquidation rate, given a pandemic, I think is really not that bad of a drop in liquidation. And you can see how it picked up so high so far in 2021 at an 86.38% for the multi-plans. Again, that'll get a little lower, but right now it's outpacing 2018 and 2019, both pre-pandemic. So providers have made changes to their payment plan guidelines and added some new flexibilities that we all had to because of the pandemic. And I do believe that that is having a very positive impact on the liquidation rate in 2021 for the multi plans. So Steve, I think we can take a look at, the machine learning and the impact on that for these plans.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we use machine learning, and what that really is, it's taking information that is specific to that particular client, looking at that, segmenting those patients within really 9 different segments, and offering payment plans specific to their time, that patient. Well, as I mentioned, if if this payment plan offer is specific to me, then I'm much more willing and able to accept it. Therefore, it would have higher recovery results. What else would
Mm.
you say, Tracy?
Well, I would say that when you are scoring accounts in a traditional way, you put them into a handful of categories. Let's just call it a high, medium, and low. That's what we used to do. And you could offer payment plans to all the highs or all the mediums or all the lows, or you could just stick with the client's recommended payment plan guidelines. When you move to machine learning models, you're taking years of historical data from the client and building a model for the ability and propensity to pay for consumers for that specific portfolio. So a model for client A is not the same as a model for client B. So you're not trying to take a geography in the, upper northeast of the United States and apply it to a geography in the southwest of the United States. It's very much tailored to a specific portfolio. You need more data because that portfolio size is smaller than what you would get if you were looking across the entire portfolio, if you were looking at all the United States, for that matter. So the machine learning model then gives some more detailed categories and gives weighted characteristics that tie together based on algorithms created for categories such as presence of an apartment number or presence of a physical street address compared to a self-pay balance, compared to whether I was in for a broken ankle or a broken elbow. And it creates all of these relationships for each of the characteristics of an account and then creates a more specific model. As we started with machine learning, we were creating payment plan recommendations for some very specific tiers of business for each client. The next step, and it is a big leap, and I'm not sure if anyone else out there in the technology world is doing it in the healthcare space, is the true personalized payment plan model, which means that if Steve goes to the same hospital that I go to for exactly the same service that I get, we will come away with different payment plans based on each of our financial background and standing at that time. And so to truly customize a model for an individual is the ultimate end goal. And, we were customizing in traditional scoring and we made it better using machine learning tailored to a specific client. And now we're going from a specific client to the individual person. So it's we're heading in a really good direction with the machine learning and the payment plan adoption rates. The more tailored you get to the plans, have a higher liquidation. We know this, and so we know that when we make the step to the personalized plans, they'll be even better than what we have today.
And then on our next slide, I think this is best illustrates, Tracy mentioned, well, having a different model for client A and different different model for client B. This just shows several clients and it talks about what their average median initial balances are. So, when you as providers set payment plan guidelines, it really needs to be individualized based on the person. But then from a corporate standpoint, looking at, well, what is our average balance? Because as you can see by this chart, their average balances vary greatly. Well, what adds to the variability? Well, the first is the mix between self-pay and self-pay after insurance, the payer mix themselves, or it may be an academic facility that has specialized practices or services. Those all create different mechanisms for balances. So if that's the first step of creating a payment plan guideline with machine learning, is just understanding the variability within your particular demographic. On the next page, Tracy, you want to walk us through this?
Right. And I think that the duration and length of plans that you were showing, Steve, since it does vary so much by facility, it really is in support of having a model that is specific to your portfolio and not using a model that is very general across many, many portfolios. This chart shows us the difference between the liquidation rate on accounts with no payment plan, which is the blue bar, and those on the single payment plans, which is the gray bar, the highest ones, and then the orange bar, which is the multi-payment plans. And so you can see that by balance on the bottom of the chart, the higher the balance gets, the lower the liquidation rate is for accounts that are not on a plan. That curve, if we put the trend line on this chart, is not nearly as steep, in fact, not at all, in comparison when you have people on a single or a multi-plan. And it, again, is just showing that the more people that you can get on a plan, and we'll talk about as early in the cycle as possible, the better it is, even if they have to alter that plan through the life of the account. So next, I think we'll talk about communication, Steve.
Yeah, making communication easy for patients, convenient, the method that they would like. You know, there was a couple of quotes from an Ernst and Young article, how a year of pandemic changed consumers. And, you know, you all as healthcare leaders should be asking, well, what consumer experience do I want to offer our patients? And, you know, if you looked at the traditional method, the conventional wisdom, it's like, well, we'll do what our competitors are doing, maybe just do it a little bit better. But it really, the article was saying you need to shift your expectations to not what other healthcare practices are doing. It's, well, what was their last experience? What was that with Amazon? Because, well, then they would have different expectations than, here, send this paper statement and they'll pay off of it. So it really, it needs to maybe reshape the way things are, the thinking about the consumer experience. So on the next page, what we talk about is really some of the, how do you make it convenient? And I'm just going to take a sidebar here and tell you about an experience that I had. Now, this is 15 or 20 years ago, but I'm going to tell you it's still true today. So I flew into the Newark airport. Maybe some of you know where I'm going. I had a rental car and I was running had not much time, but I had wanted to fill up the rental car before I got to the airport. Well, guess what? It's still true today. In New Jersey, you cannot pump your own gas. And I'm thinking, my gosh, I would be out of here by now and at the airport if I wasn't waiting in this line. Then I thought, what in the world? I'm not pumping nitroglycerin into this car. It's just gas. I've done it a million times, but you can't do it. So that's one of those, okay, you want to make that's an off topic, but just saying, you know, you need to make things convenient for the consumer, for the patient. So maybe bring us back to reality, Tracy. When it comes to the patient, what did we learn?
What did we learn? Okay, I don't like pumping gas. I think it takes way too much time. No.
Well, then go to New Jersey.
There you go. Right. I'll go to Jersey. Okay, yeah. So, you know, what we learned is really we categorized into 3 areas. One is, you know, people want personalized payment plans. We know that there's increased adherence to the plans, and, you know, there's really less follow-up that needs to be done on accounts when they're in a payment plan. Yes, there's follow-up on broken arrangements, but it still is less frequent than the follow-up that's needed or outreach that's needed for a patient that is not on a plan. Second is that patients want to communicate in their preferred method. We know that engagement and responsiveness increases when we ask somebody if they want to communicate through text. Do they want to go to the portal and they prefer to make their arrangements in the portal, or do they want to call someone and then we're available to take their call? So honoring the communication preferences of the patient leads to a happier experience financially. We want the communications to be easy to use and have self-service options. Patients do want this. The self-service usage is increasing. We've got some charts on that later, but it also provides a level of convenience to the patient where they can manage their finances on their own terms at their own time. When you have a good, easy to use self-service process, whether it's through a text with making a payment through a link that goes to your portal or just your overall portal experience, it does increase the confidence of the consumer in those self-service options. And that means they'll continue to use the self-service. So even if you turn on self-service and much of it isn't, today isn't used, and in your first 3 months you're saying, wow, adoption's fairly low, it's really taking a long time to increase here, that's okay, because you're in it for the long game, not the short game. And when you look at it in a year from now, you'll see the benefit from that increase in self-service options. So, I know when we first turned on some of the portal features, I wanted consumers to use those features right away. And I thought, wow, all this time we put into to make it easier, and adoption is just so slow to increase. But then you look at it a while later and you say, okay, patients have to get used to it. They have to know it's there. They have to experience it once or twice to build their confidence. And then they're willing to go back again and use that the next time they get a bill or the follow up after their next visit. So it does take time, and just, I would say be patient and reasonable with that level of follow up.
So what are some of the next best steps? It really is convenient. My story about being self-service, pump my own gas. Well, hey, I'm old enough to remember when self-service at gas stations were first introduced, there was full service and self-service, and self-service was a penny less, and they were trying to get people over there. But it's amazing how many people didn't want to do it because they'd never done it before. So, but once you've experienced the convenience of something, self-service, then it becomes just second nature. Well, the other part of this is the effectiveness of it. So the pandemic revealed the necessity of effective patient financial communications. It really is not just, okay, make it easy, but then there's no information there. It's a combination of being effective, giving them what they wanted to hear, and it's all about the communication. And as the quote there, communication is perhaps the most visible manifestation of culture. It is really the ability to communicate, but communicate in the terms that they will understand. If you go to a doctor and they're talking in medical language that you don't understand as a patient, that's not very effective. The best doctors, their bedside manner takes it to a level that they understand. So convenient in the method that the patient wants, and effective, that it's understood. Tracy, on the next page, you have a little bit more insight into some of the things that we've done on a financial journey.
Right. So creating financial journey maps it's a large exercise to do, but it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be done with some yellow sticky notes and some Sharpies and a good clean wall to stick those up on. But, we really do look at where we're touching the patient in every way, whether it's a statement, it's a phone call, maybe it's an IVA interaction, maybe they've gone to the portal, or even an email or just a piece of traditional correspondence that gets sent in. And you look at and analyze the ways by creating the journey map of how does the patient see you as the provider communicating with them about their financial situation. And you really break down each one of these areas of communication that the patient receives into exactly the process that they experience. What's the time between each process? What is the detail that they see, what's facing to them? What are the things that they may notice that are unseen to them? It could be things like how the customer service representative treats them while they're on the phone, the mailing time that it takes for a statement to go out, the amount of grace period that you give somebody after a promise to pay is broken before you make that next contact. How do you handle an opt out from a text message when somebody doesn't say stop, but they write you another message back? All the things that go on, taking it some time in some small groups for the subject with the subject matter experts that are just involved in each of these processes, and looking at how the patient is impacted. And, that's what we do to decide what processes need to be improved upon and where we could make things better for the patient, as well as save some time and energy. So if we go to the next page, some of the things that you can consider, these are just some examples, but there's many things you can look at in the process. But take a look at your statements. About once a year at state, we take a look at the statements that go out. We want to make sure that the design is up to date, it's modern, it reflects all of the ways that the patient can communicate with us, that it's easy to understand, and that there's a very clear call to action. So once that statement goes out, what are we asking the patient to do? Is it a balance due? Are we asking them to go online and pay? Whatever that is, we work with our vendor partner to provide different samples of statements that achieved, the goals of each one of those. So we really consider the call to action when we're looking at that statement design. Next, you could just look at your call center accepting patient calls during non-traditional business hours. We're doing business at all times of the day, really. In an online world, it's 24/7, right, through any portal. But when do you accept patient calls for those more difficult account situations? Do you want to have your team be available in the evening or on the weekends? I know that we provide evening and weekend hours for the inbound and outbound call center. And there's a good amount of people that do want to communicate during those times. So we want to be available for them to communicate. You look at, this is a big one, patient abandonment rates during the self-service portal or your integrated voice response, the IVR systems. Where are people opting out of the process? And those are really spots where you can look for opportunities to see if you can get the engagement at a higher level. Counting clicks. I don't know if anyone's ever done this with their portal. How many clicks does it take to verify and authenticate that you've got the right person? How many clicks does it take for somebody to see their account balance and be offered that payment plan? And so there's people out here in the world that are experts on portal utilization and probably within your own organizations that can really help you with best use of that portal navigation. Offering text payments. People read text messages. They see the text messages quickly. It's a matter of whether they decide to respond to that text message right away or not. But look at what your texting experience is, and are you making it easy for the consumer to understand what you're asking for in the text message? And then if you're sending a URL or some kind of link in that text, is it going back to the landing page that you're expecting with the experience that you're looking for that patient? And last but not least, just another thought for you is how timely the responses are when someone wants to chat. If you have a chat feature turned on, you want to make sure that that's available for people and not that they're waiting several minutes. I know if I click on a chat and I'm on a website, click the chat button, I expect a response pretty much within about 5 to 10 seconds from whoever I'm going to be chatting with. It might be a bot or it might be a person, but I'm expecting a quick reply because I don't want to sit on that website if I'm not going to get a response to the chat. And then really, can the chat be are they able to resolve the question that the person wants, or do you need to get extra assistance? So I know that we've managed the chat functionality for some providers, and people ask good questions. There never was a very, very high volume compared to portal usage or text messaging, but the people that did want help through chat had more complex account situations, and mostly we were able to get them started in a process and then would have to do some follow-up over the phone thereafter. But just being available to get started, I think, is important when you're in that chat. All right, so if we look at then ways to improve, once you've done the journey map and you've asked some of these tough questions about different pieces of the process, you will no doubt find a few areas that you can make the process better. And you can prioritize those areas. What is the most important thing for your organization? Is it important to launch a text message communication campaign? or maybe just increase the texting that you're doing with your existing portfolios. Are you sending e-statements today? Are they getting the right messaging for the right patients? And just overall, what payment plans are being offered and how do you communicate those plans to your patients? They're all good questions to ask, and I think lead you to be very creative and get ideas for how to make the process better. For us in text messaging, that was an area of improvement. And we really expanded it during the pandemic, specifically related to our third party bad debt collection area. We've got some statistics, but in 2020, 54% of all text message recipients reached out to discuss the account. So that means we sent them a text and they then gave us a phone call or opted back into the portal and had some interaction with us about their account. That is very meaningful when you think about the ability to send a text message and just the effort it takes to send a text versus what it takes to make a phone call, and the convenience of having the patient answer the phone just when you call them and they're kind of, they're on the spot a little bit, or they have to decide whether they want to answer you or not, versus a text message that you can receive. You can absorb the text message, think about whether you want to deal with that right now or not, and then make that decision. Okay, I'm going to respond right now, or I'm going to go look at that text message in a couple hours when it's a more convenient time for me. So that's a very high engagement rate for text messages in bad debt. And you think about that, think how much higher it is in that early out environment. Now, also, it's even higher, the higher scored consumers that you're working with. So for those very top ability to pay consumers, they respond even more often. 61% of the high scored recipients responded to text messages. So you may find in your portfolio that certain pockets of inventory want to communicate with you via text more often than others. And if you're measuring this information, then you can have very customized strategies to communicate to the patient in the way that they want to be communicated with. And yes, it's not easy to measure all these items. You need a database of information that shows you who did you text and what were the responses, and maybe even measuring after they responded, what was their liquidation rate, or did they ever set up a payment plan, or what activities did they take after they responded to that text message. But I'll guarantee you, if you can get the discipline in place to do that, you will see a lot of trends within your data. So our text messages, Steve, you've got a sample. You want to tell us a little bit about what the text looks like?
Yeah, and this, a lot of what Tracy was talking about was relative to bad debt, but by the same token, it's like, well, what does the text message look like and where does it take you? Because in bad debt, people can make an immediate pay. They go right back to our portal, okay? Or here, it's driving people to MyChart. So it hits the, okay, this is the best communication method that they prefer, and as well as then driving them to, okay, let me find out what I owe. And if I can pay immediately through MyChart, is already launching me there just by clicking that single button.
And then patients go to the portal. And, I can tell you that we have definitely received a very large increase in portal usage for our accounts. And, the amounts that people are paying online are going up, but those who pay over $100 in a single payment make up 39.8% of our portal payments. Those that are under $100 are 60.2%. So there's a real convenience factor going on for those smaller balance accounts. And as people get more and more used to the portal, then we can, see in the chart on the right that the average portal payment amount has actually been going up year over year. So when I said earlier that it's a long game, it is, but the time is right to start now, because it's the digital and technology age, and you have to be in this portal and texting and emailing experience with patients. You don't want to be left behind in those areas. But now in 2021, the average portal payment for us is over $150 per payment. So you can see that that's gone up just about $50 on average since 2018, and I'm sure it's just going to continue to climb.
So patients want unique solutions for their unique challenges. So how the heck do you do that? Well, here's how we did it. We implemented, and I've talked about it before, machine learning, um, artificial intelligence. And it uses, because really you as providers are in the same boat. You have tons and tons of information. Well, we get that same information from all of our providers as well. Why not use that to then do modeling to understand your database? Um, Once you do that, you can enable personalized approaches, whether that's the communication strategy. Well, do they prefer text? Do they prefer email? Do they want the traditional method of statement, letters, and calls? So you've got both the call cadence as well as the communication strategy. We did some case studies, and we've got a couple of them. Well, one of them's posted right now. We'll do another webinar that I'll talk about in a minute. Based on, once you do that, you do get strong recovery rates. In fact, in side-by-side tests, there was about a 6.5% increase in the recovery rate. And you think, well, 6.5. Well, if you're already performing at a high level, to increase that much more, it's because you're using data that's specific to you as opposed to an off-the-shelf solution. And by the same token, the adherence rate to payments are also increased. So we've saw some of these other things where it's okay. Here was the increase. There was an increase in payment plan adoption rates, and you can do that to make it efficient. That last 20% is saying, well, you can do all this with less calls because it's a more targeted approach. Anything you'd add, Tracy?
Well, I'd say that our recent case study in the bottom right-hand corner with Froedtert Health and the Medical College of Wisconsin also showed not only the increase in recoveries and increase in the payment plan usage, but a reduction in outbound calls, along with, so a 20% reduction in outbound calls, along with an 8.5% increase in patient contacts. So,
Right.
we were really challenged with saying, all right, how can we reduce the amount of outreach to patients, but still be as or more effective as we were in the past? And really, the only way we were able to do that was with that very targeted machine learning model. And, I guess if we can reach out to the patient less, that's probably a good thing, but make it more effective when we do. So these strategies, these improved contact strategies, increase payment plan adoption. There's no annoyance factor to the patient then of making their phone ring so many times or sending so many text messages, because if you can be very thought through and diligent in when you're sending those messages and with which channels, you will keep the patient happy with the outreach and not feeling too overwhelmed. So overall, when you learn and you can just help the patient feel comfortable with your process, it's a good thing. And not overreaching or calling too often is a very important part of that process too. If we go to the next slide, you can see the importance of phone calls though. So there is still a place for phone calls, even with all the technology and the digitization today. We know that 70% of the payment plans are created the same day of a phone call. 80% are created within 7 days of a phone call. We know that it takes 1 to 2 inbound calls in an early out setting to adopt a payment plan, regardless of whether it's a single or a multi-plan payment. We also know that it takes 1 to 2 outbound calls to adopt a single plan and 2 to 3 outbound calls to adopt a multi-payment plan account. Now that's logical because if you remember, the multi-plan accounts are the ones where an account may break their arrangement and they may not have as many financial resources to pay. So we know that the calls are meaningful as well for certain pockets of inventory. So this really tells us that if you're not able to connect to the right party early, you're less likely to sign up for a payment arrangement. So you want to get the consumer within those first few outbound and inbound calls. And the earlier then that you can create the single account payment plans, the better off that you are. So, should every account be called On day 31, after a statement went out, I'm going to say no. Should every account be called on day 45 after a statement went out? And I'm going to say no, because different strategies apply to different accounts. And you can be effective within each of those strategies. Yes, there's fairness in the process. Everyone needs to get their statements. Everyone needs to be afforded the ability to communicate through all of these channels, but there's different ways to be effective in different sections of a portfolio. Looking at the next slide, you know, you don't have to focus on the numbers on the heat map, but rather just knowing that, you know, there are some boundaries where payment plans and extended plans may not make sense for a portfolio. There may be people that need plans that are longer than what your policy will allow. But by taking a look and measuring at the average balance of payment plans, the duration of plans, and then doing this within your different strategies for reach out to patients, whether it's the call, the text, the email, the paper mail communication, you will start to see which areas you get very high adoption rates by which balance ranges. Steve, on the next slide, we can see that Champion Challengers is the way that we use new strategies. We create pilot programs whenever possible, and then take inventory and separate it into test and control groups in a truly data science random sample manner. And then we apply a new strategy to a portion of the portfolio, and we monitor the liquidation rates and adoption usage and engagement by patients of that strategy compared to our existing strategy before we're making a change across all of a portfolio. We like to share those results with our clients, and we're always excited to do that. And sometimes clients even give us ideas for what they'd like to see within the strategy. So it's a great program to use. We have a reporting database that's built out specifically to measure these Champion Challenger programs. When you implement the strategy changes, I would say just try to measure, you know, where you're at very early on after the pilot is turned on or the Champion Challenger is turned on, and stick with it. You know, maybe the strategy will look like it's really outperforming, and then it'll take a downturn, and then it'll take another step up. And you just have to watch it over a good amount of time, usually 4 to 6 months for a new strategy. So and then at the end of the day, obviously patient satisfaction survey scores, that's a good place to know if your strategy for communication is effective, and really tailoring the questions in those surveys to make sure that you're getting the feedback you want from each of those channels. And Steve, I think we are concluding. I'll hand it back to you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so in conclusion, maximize, we've said it before, but to communicate in the method that people want to communicate is vitally important. Why? Because if you relied on phone calls, well, you know this from your own experience, you just don't answer the phone anymore. I'm going to let that go to voicemail. I'm going to see who called, etc. So you've got to maximize when you do have someone on the phone, or when you have a message, a text message, it can't be a wasted opportunity. It's got to be an effective way. So maximize every communication touch point with the patients. And that does, in fact, increase patient satisfaction as well as the recoveries themselves. So today, now would be the time to enter in. I see we've got a couple questions already. To enter in your questions into the Q&A box. So we'll have a few minutes for questions while a couple of others are gathering. I will tell you, we've got some other webinars coming up here in August. Another webinar here, August 18th, what you need to know about recent legislative updates. That would include Regulation F, House Bill 2547, the Nevada legislation. So those are important things for you to know. Well, what's on the horizon and how should I react as a provider? And then on September 9th, we kind of alluded to it, another case study regarding machine learning and analytics. It's examining the use of AI and increasing recoveries. And that's a case study with Froedtert Health and the Medical College of Wisconsin. So Tracy, I'm going to give in fact, I'm going to give every one of these questions so far to you. Is that all right?
I suppose.
What was the most impactful change that you made? You talked about a lot of change, but where did you see the most impact?
Mhm. Well, definitely the machine learning models. It was a process that we started back in late 2018, and having that foundation already in place going into the pandemic was good to have because we had the infrastructure there and we were able to customize arrangements for patients as they were calling in. So we were able to proactively reach out to patients and allow our representatives to know what was a good plan. So what we do is we take a payment plan offer on an account, and we have offer one and offer two on the accounts. And so we already had a process built in where we could, modify a plan if we needed to, rather than the representative just kind of taking whatever the patient offered. They would have an opportunity to give them, a second chance offer if they couldn't make the arrangement that we had that was the recommended primary offer on an account. So just having that foundation in place was really good because that was, for many months, that was such a high prevalence type of call we got, was to change a payment plan, that we needed to know what was okay to change it to. What could we really do and stay within the client's guidelines.
Thanks, Tracy. Hey, what was the, I'm sorry, let me read this. Uh, what are you implementing now to improve communication?
Well, gosh, there's so many there's so many projects that we have, but obviously the virtual assistant, Mia, my intelligent assistant, she's active on some portfolios already, and we're expanding the use of Mia, particularly in our third party debt collection side of the business, and she, just she takes payments. She helps folks with their account balance. She sets up payment arrangements. She negotiates some of those first and second offer arrangements, and she can even take, bankruptcy, deceased information from someone that's calling in to provide that to us. And she verifies and authenticates that we have the right caller on the phone. So I'm excited for to expand the use of Mia, and then of course, more related to those individualized, personalized payment plans for consumers. We're going to be doing some things where we'll be pushing information to consumers through text and through email, whatever the consumer's preferred method of communication is, that are for them. So Steve, you'll get your own arrangement in the future, and it'll be specific to the facility that you go to see. And we'll watch those payment plan adoption rates increase, and hopefully the promise kept rates increase as well. So we have to build a different model for each client, and in some clients multiple models. So it's no small process, but we've been doing a lot of legwork to get that expanded as fast as possible.
Awesome. All right. As I mentioned, add any questions one in the Q&A panel. TCPA, is that a consideration when texting?
Yes,
Okay,
it
good
definitely is.
answer, good answer.
Okay, good. All right. Well, the Telephone Consumer Protection Act definitely is important. We have to have consent to text and send those messages to someone's cell phone if we're doing this in an automated, obviously an automated way, and which we do, and we use consent flags in our system. We also have a way to text message to a phone without consent. And I know that sounds scary. It's not scary because it's a human initiated text message. So there's texting that you do in an automated way where you need the consent. And then there's human initiated text messaging that you can do in those areas where you do not yet have consent. So you can gain the consent to send the text message. In an automated way through a manual texting process. And, we've got some attorneys and folks smarter than me that understand the nuances. And, but what I know is that we do both. We do human initiated text and automated text messages. And we send a high volume. each day. We do our best not to overtext consumers. We have certain thresholds in place to make sure that we're not texting too often and not, hundreds of times on an account by any means, a lot less than that. And, we just build a strategy with the client that they're comfortable with.
Great. Yeah, I would just add one more thing regarding TCPA. Consent or not, whether it's human intervention, peer, which we call peer-to-peer, or consent, you still have to have the opt-out options, as well as obviously managing those opt-out options. Because once they opt out, you want to make sure you do not send any more text messages.
Well, and Steve, when they opt out or they type stop, they don't only type stop. We were on a call with a client earlier today and he said, "Oh, I know what they type." Yeah, they type all kinds of fun stuff. It might be asking for a statement and it might be saying, "I don't want to pay the bill," or "I've never heard of it." And so everything that the consumer types back to you is important to look at and allows you to know a little bit more about the account and where that account is headed. And we actually created an omni-channel communication specialist position that manages all those text stop messages, as well as all the other things that people creatively can tell us about when they text back. So I think, I should have answered that to your question, because I do think that our omni-channel communication specialist roles will expand in the next year, that we'll need to add more of those positions as we do more with chat and as text messaging expands.
Perfect. Maybe let's promote one more time the upcoming webinars. And I would say this for those webinars that are coming up. If you'll go on to our website, statecollectionservice.com, go in the Stay Informed section, you'll find all kinds of information. There's white papers on this, there's case studies, and then information about our upcoming webinars, and then recordings of our past webinars. So this recording will be available. We'll put it up, give us about 48 hours, and it'll be up on the website if you'd like to share this with others. So with that, I do appreciate everybody's time today. Thanks for joining us. Tracy, thanks for keeping us on track. So thanks all. Have a great day.
Bye, Steve. Thank you.
Goodbye.